Podcast 8, the election of the Berlin Soviet on the 10th of November 1918. Okay, so we've established in the very first podcast that a week earlier, on the 6th of November, workers' councils, or Soviets as they're called, were started to spontaneously form throughout the whole of the north of Germany, and it then spread to Bavaria. Different types of Soviets. Some of them were formed in the navy, on the boats, sailors' Soviets. Some of them started to form actually out at the front, at the fighting fronts, soldiers' Soviets, and some of them, the majority, formed in the factories, initially in the ports, and then increasingly spreading to other inland cities, Hamburg and of course to Berlin. Now, as I say, these Soviets were initially spontaneous. They were sort of self-help organisations, workers rallying together to sort out their own affairs. They were not really politicised, only up to the point where they simply said, we're not going to be told what to do by the ruling classes. That doesn't mean they want to get rid of them. It simply means that we will talk to each other before we obey them. So on the boats, sailors, Soviets, basically didn't get rid of the commander. The commander of the boat would be an imperial officer, one of the Kaiser's men, an upper class, a junker. But they would consult with each other and before obeying the officers. So effectively the officers are losing control. They've lost their authority. The same in the army and the same in the factories. Okay, so to some extent, therefore, in the cities, authority, executive power, decision making has actually passed down to the working classes. It doesn't mean that the ruling classes have been abolished. They're still there in the factories. You've still got the same industrial elites, but they have lost authority once these Soviets have come into existence. Now, what you need to bear in mind is that although these Soviets formed across the whole of Germany, we've got to really think about the capital, Berlin, because Berlin is the seat of government. And if we're going to move to a revolutionary situation, really it is the capital city that will dictate the change, because Abwehr and the government are based in the capital city. If there's going to be an overthrow of government, then it is the workers in the capital that will dictate the pace. Now, what happened on the 10th of November, therefore, was very, very interesting. You've got many Soviets in Berlin that have been spontaneously formed across all of the factories. Well, basically, all of the Soviets in Berlin sent a representative, so a representative from each Soviet to a central Soviet. So effectively, it was called the Berlin Soviet. I could do it to explain what this means. It is effectively a form of parliament, okay, but not like the Reichstag. It's different in two ways. Firstly, it is a parliament that only represents the workers. It doesn't represent the middle classes. It doesn't represent the upper classes. It only represents the workers. And secondly, it only represents the workers of Berlin. So it's the workers and the workers of Berlin. Now, this Berlin Soviet, I don't know exactly how many men there would have been on it, probably 200 or 300. Clearly 200 or 300 men, put them in a room, they're not going to be able to make decisions, so they needed to elect effectively a smaller body, so they elected a 28-man executive committee. Now, in a sense, if you're using the same analogy, if the Berlin Soviet is like a parliament of the workers in Berlin, the 28-man executive committee is effectively like an appointed government, but appointed only by the workers of Berlin. Now, this 28-man executive committee, at that stage, if you look at who the 28 members were, they were members of the Independent Socialist Party. So the breakaway party that had broken away from the majority socialists, so they're much more left wing, much more radical in their views. Remember, the USPD in itself is split. We looked at that in the last podcast. Okay, so the extreme left wing of the USPD were very much moving towards power should lie with the Soviets, and we should abolish the whole system, get rid of the upper classes and the middle classes. They were revolutionary, whereas the right wing of the USPD were more prepared to cooperate with Hebert and his properly elected government. But it was the left-wing members of the USPD, okay, those led by Labrador, remember the previous podcast, that infiltrated the Berlin Soviet. Okay, so that was an alarming development from Hebert's point of view. So, it says here, the question now really is, who is actually in control of Germany? Strictly speaking, Hebert's government, Hebert is, okay, for the reasons we've said. Prince Max had handed power to him. Hebert is the leader of the largest party in the Reichstag that had been properly elected in 1912. That is the nearest you've got to a truly representative assembly, the Reichstag. Unfortunately, Hebert's government is based in Berlin, and what's now formed in Berlin is a Soviet, a 28-man committee that has been appointed by a Soviet that represents only the working classes of Berlin. So the Berlin Soviet is accountable to the workers' Soviets that control the capital city. And in a sense, whoever controls the capital city, you could argue, controls Germany. So on the 22nd of November, recognising there was a real problem here, Hebert met with the Berlin Soviet, talked this one through. They said, look, you know, we have got a lot in common here. Hebert is a socialist after all. The Berlin Soviet, obviously a socialist, but there are obviously fundamental disagreements between them. But what they did say is, for the moment, we need to work together. Okay, we need to power share in some way. So they tentatively reached an agreement for a form of dual government, power sharing, until a constituent assembly was elected. Remember, Hebert was hanging everything on the fact there needed to be a national election in which all Germans could vote about the future form of government for Germany. So that was the agreement that was reached. Okay, so that's the significance of the Berlin Soviet. If you go on to the next podcast, podcast number 9, that will develop a little bit more about this idea of power sharing and dual government. Thank you.